person I get to announce is the Jeff Fritz, C# Fritz himself. And he's going to be talking to us about web forms to Blazor. Very cool. Jeff, I'm excited. Nice green screen. You ready to roll?
Well, Maddie, I was going to replace it with your kitchen because that went over so well at build. I just couldn't find the right place to put myself in the kitchen.
That makes sense.
So good to see you, Maddie. Thank you for helping us out here at .NET Conf. I feel like I haven't been here in 4 hours.
Long time for you, Jeff.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I'm going to be talking about web forms and Blazor. It's like two things that shouldn't go together, but I think we've got a chance here.
All right, have fun. See you in 30.
Thank you. Yes. Here we go. I've got too many clicky things here I got to move around. There we go. All right, friends, my name is Jeff Fritz. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it might be where you are. And if you're watching the recording, you missed all the fun of the live event here at .NET Conf. We're going to be talking about, it's over there, web forms to Blazor, and introducing a project that I've been working on called the BlazorWebFormComponents. Now, let me tell you, this is something that we've been thinking about, we've been tinkering with as a community. This isn't a Microsoft project. This is a community project we've been tinkering with on my Twitch channel for the better part of a year. It all started about a year ago with Dan Roth on stage at Microsoft Ignite, and we talked about what you could do with Blazor components, and there might be a path forward to integrate, to migrate. Let's talk more about this. So look, we know there's already a problem out there for folks who are ASP.NET Web Forms developers, right? Web Forms, .NET Framework 4.8, they're going to continue to be supported. However, they run only on Windows, and they're not going to be receiving any new features. And we might like to use containers and use some new features like WebAssembly and Blazor inside of our application. Make it a little bit more responsive, make it a little bit more interactive, right? But this means there's different programming models between .NET 5, .NET Core, .NET Standard, .NET Framework, and they don't all play together well, particularly when we talk about ASP.NET Web Forms. Well, you may be like me and you tried migrating to MVC, and it wasn't the right solution for being able to migrate and maintain your application. It was a dramatic shift in the programming model. You don't really have components. You were managing HTML output straight, right? You were writing directly to the metal, and you ended up with a more testable solution, but it still took a lot of work. It was still ASP.NET. You could move to .NET Core. You could move to .NET 5 with modifications. It's going to take some work, but you could get there. You could run your web forms and MVC in the same ASP.NET application, and you'd effectively create what we like to call a Franken app, right? You're putting these two things together that aren't the same programming model, and it gets a little bit tricky to manage at that point. So some other folks said, hey, let's go to Angular, Vue, or maybe React. That's not a good solution for many folks either, because while you do have a similar user interface, component-driven development model, you've got great open source components available. You can do unit testing, so it's similar, but now you got to change from C# Visual Basic to JavaScript, which means you need to rewrite everything. That also means potentially your code doesn't match one-to-one with the code and architecture presented in your original ASPX pages, ASCX controls. So you're going to struggle. Well, what about Blazor? Let's talk about Blazor as the solution. You end up with a similar user interface, component-driven development model that we have in ASP.NET Web Forms. There's open source components available, and there's unit testing frameworks available like BUnit. We heard about BUnit a little bit earlier from our friend Ed Charbonneau. I can continue writing C#. I can migrate my VB to C#, and I can even take all of my logic and move it into .NET Standard or .NET 5 libraries. So I can continue using a lot of my code. But what if what if we could make Blazor match one-to-one with the code and architecture that was presented in those ASPX pages and those ASCX controls? There's an opportunity there. So let's talk about the similarities between web forms and Blazor. Let's dig in just a little bit further, peel back the hood here and start throwing some wrenches and see what's underneath there. In web forms, it's over there. Applications are configured in your global ASAX file. You have pages and controls. You build with raw HTML mixed with controls, render content on the server, execute and interact with JavaScript. Blazor server side, while it's not a global ASAX, you can write all your startup code into startup CS. You have components that can be pages. That's pretty similar. It's very similar in syntax and structure. I build with Razor templates and components instead of web forms templates and components, but I'm still building with templates and components. I still render content on the server, and I can still execute and interact with JavaScript. I can even interrupt with the JavaScript. All right, now we're talking. But there are some differences that we need to cross. Web forms, of course, you have that bee sting notation, right? You see that and you kind of cringe because you know bad things happen between those angle brackets. There's some C# there that is up to no good. This next one, it's in some communities, it's almost like verboten. Don't say this word, the V word, okay? Don't say that one. Postback happens, right? Postback is a thing where everything happens on one page, and a lot of folks actually are starting to embrace postback in modern frameworks, so it's not terrible. Master pages were a thing. .NET Framework 1.0 to 4.8, it's supported. Libraries are written in .NET Framework, and it all runs on IIS on Windows, so you're locked in. Blazor server side means we have to go to Razor templates with our @ notation. State's managed on the server, so view state passes back and forth, but now everything gets managed on the server, and we use a SignalR channel to pass data back and forth. Instead of master pages, we have layout components, but they're similar in concept, different syntax. .NET Core 3.0 and later, components are written in .NET Standard 2 and later, and it runs on Windows, Mac, and Linux. And for those that want to do containers, that's a big one. Windows, Mac, and Linux, particularly Linux. I can put stuff into a .NET 5 container, and it runs great for me. So let's explore a little. What's it look like if we took a component, a Razor component, and made it look like an ASP control? Let's take that first step and think this through here. Easy for me to say. I have a couple of Visual Studios open. Let me show you this one that I have here. Now, this is an ASPX page. This is from our eShop on Blazor sample, and I'll have a link for you at the end to this sample and a little bit of our documentation of how we worked with this, and we started putting together a recommended recipe for how to migrate from web forms to Blazor, some of the concepts. But I want to show you what this initial page looked like. It's a page that's got some content. It lives within a master page. We kind of do that in Blazor. We have a layout, right? So instead of defining our master page file up here, our layout's defined somewhere else. And we have a list view that has all these templates that get bound to data. And who doesn't like binding markup, binding controls to data, and it just applies and we get that cool template rendering. So the first step that we took was, well, let's make this into a list view component. And you can see my list view component over here. Where is it? Right there. And it's a very simple component with a couple of templates in it. Well, that's great. That gets me somewhere, and I can apply it here. And it starts to look like an ASP list view control. I have a list view that has items, and I've got this weird T item thing. And templates are kind of weird here. Empty template, that's easy to decide. If I don't have records, I'll put that information, a table header. That's what I want to put in the top row of my table. And I've got a row template, right? This is what I want each record in my catalog to be output. This is a very simple catalog results page. And I don't really have a way to do layout with this. I kind of have to just wrap it as a table. And that's tricky. That's something that's a little bit more advanced than just putting together a component here. But I think what you can see is that we've got this very simple component that gets us somewhere. It starts to have the same syntax. It starts to feel like something that could be a little bit more complex and a little bit more serviceable if we were to take it to more situations. Let me go back to the slides here, and let's talk about some possible next steps. Let's make these into some real components. Let's actually take that idea for a list view, turn it into a real component that folks can download and install. And this is something that we've been doing, like I said, for almost a year over on my Twitch stream. So first thing you have to do is you have to create a Razor class library, right? This is easy. This is just another project model, and you start dropping your Razor files in there and some Razor CS files. Just throw them in there. Okay. And you can compile and see them as a library. You can reference them inside of Blazor projects and interact with them at that point. So I started putting together a sample project that would take everything that was inside of that Razor class library and put it onto just a default sample page so I could see exactly what the rendering of those Razor files, Razor CS files, looked like. That's not bad. Okay, I can stomach that. That's a decent process. Yes, and do a lot of repeating of that. Build, tune your components, and rerun it over in the sample. Tune the components, rerun it into the sample, and see what it looks like. So now, if we take that list view component that we started with, and we started tuning it, let's get it to line up as best as possible to these web forms markup, right? I simplified the markup from web forms here so I could fit it all on the screen, okay? And so I have an ASP list view and I have all this stuff here. Well, now instead of having ASP::list view, I just have list view. And I can put an @ref instead of an ID, right? That's the way in Blazor we reference models, we reference parameters inside of our class. But run @server, I can tell Blazor to ignore that. So maybe we just allow that to copy over and just get ignored. Item placeholder ID, well, I know what that is. Item type, okay, that's a catalog item. I can figure that out. And the context, right, that's our data that we're going to repeat, right? That's our placeholder that we're going to use inside of our rows. Well, I want it to look just like it does in web forms, so I'll call that item as well. Now, we figured out how to make a layout template because there's an interesting thing that happens with Blazor where I can actually take everything that was rendered and rerun the builder and put it inside of another block of code, another layout. So we created a layout template. You see there on the second box, right? This context specifies, well, where are you actually going to place the content for this layout? And we're going to place it down here. So we end up with these three main places where we have to write new code. We have to make one or two changes for that @ref, but the rest of the code that you see here is identical. Okay, that's pretty good. That's a lot of reuse when we think about reusing our markup, right? If the purpose of these components is let's reuse as much of our user interface as possible, I think we've landed really well there. So that's good, but then let's cross that testable boundary. How do we test these components when we get into them? So I already mentioned I've traced and used bunit from our friend Eagle Hansen, github.com/eagle/bunit. Check it out. It is a fantastic library that plugs into your favorite unit testing library and allows you to execute Blazor pages, Blazor components, and inspect how they interact, inspect the properties of the component, inspect the HTML that's been rendered. And for these components that we're trying to build, we want to make sure we generate the same HTML that the original ASP.NET controls rendered. So this was a key find and a key step in the process for us to make components that do the same thing with the same API. Very easy then to draw from the original ASP.NET documentation and make the same samples generate the same code that was in the documentation. We wanted to build those unit tests, like I said, verify the component delivers the matching HTML. We've already written more than 230 unit tests for our Blazor Web Forms component library. And I want to show you what some of them look like, because this is kind of compelling. This is interesting when folks ask about, well, how do I do these things? So this is the solution, and you've probably seen the link at the bottom of the slides to the GitHub repository. It's also available out there on NuGet. I'll show you the link for that a little bit later. But I have my sample projects. I told you I have sample projects that have samples of how every one of these controls work up there. I have my unit test project here, and I have folders for every component that we've been testing. I've got Razor files for every one of the scenarios for each control that we want to unit test. So for example, we're testing the data bound fields for the grid view component. Using the bunit syntax, I have a fixture, I specify a component under test, and I have my grid view with the exact same syntax that I had inside of the sample code. And I've tuned it a little bit so I can use some sample data that I have readily available. My unit test just says run that unit, run that component, generate what it looks like, and let's inspect and make sure it generates the same HTML that we expect. Now, that's not bad. That's not bad at all. And when you look down here inside my unit tests, you can see that's not the right output. These unit tests run about 245 of them right now, and they run in about 5-6 seconds. So we love seeing our unit tests run quickly, give us that great feedback that we need so that we know we haven't broken anything. And when you think about working on a series of components like this, that means that I can isolate a component, run just the tests against that component as I add new features to ensure that I don't break any of the other samples and existing features that are out there. Really great stuff. I encourage you to check out all the cool stuff with BUnit and get writing some unit tests for maybe you're building components, maybe you're building a Blazor application, but make sure you check that out. All right. Let me head back over to the slides because I've got a couple more things I want to show you here. And I'm running out of time. Maddie, I'm running out of time over here. So how do we package those components? How do we deliver them to you? Easy. NuGet. NuGet's the way we deliver everything in .NET, those packages, so they can be referenced and used by your favorite applications. So we packaged up the Razor class library as a NuGet package, published it. We packaged it with .NET Pack. We deployed it to NuGet.org, and I've got it all wired up and automated with Azure pipelines. Real easy. I don't have to think about it when I deploy my project into my main branch on GitHub. It automatically does the .NET Pack and sends it over to NuGet.org. I don't have to think. I just have to know this is ready to go and put it in the main branch, and it deploys. I've got documentation and samples that we've been keeping up, and the samples try to match one-to-one with the MSDN, the old MSDN ASP.NET samples. We've got Markdown in a docs folder that's available for you. We published that Markdown using the mkdocs project in GitHub Actions. You can find it living at fritzandfriends.github.io Blazor Web Forms Components. Our samples get bundled into a Docker container and then deployed to Azure App Service. And you can see all of the components running live with a server-side rendering at Blazor Web Forms Components, AzureWebsites.net. Really great stuff out there that you can check out. I'm looking at my time. I want to make sure I get to my last sample, so I'm going to skip the next demo and get right into talking about the migration process. So it's a simple 3-step process. The problem is each one of the 3 steps is going to take you a little bit of time. You want to move your business logic out of your ASP.NET Web Forms, get them out of those ASPX files and move them into class libraries. Anything that isn't directly modifying the user interface, get it into a class library. Make sure that class library is is .NET Standard. That way you can reference it from ASP.NET Web Forms and also from Blazor, whether it's Blazor with .NET Core 3.1, 3.2, Blazor 3.2 with WebAssembly, or .NET 5. They'll all be able to reference and continue using that .NET Standard library. Go and create your new Blazor project, reference those class libraries that have all your business logic in it, migrate your static files, your images, your CSS, your JavaScript files, all those static things that you have, get them migrated over there, and then migrate your configuration. Any of that system configuration you have in web config, get it over into your configuration for your application. And then the big one, start rewriting those ASPX and ASCX as .razor files. We even wrote an ebook about this process, aka.ms/blazor-ebook. What if we had a way to do this faster? Because rewriting all those ASPX and ASCX pages as razor files, that's going to take a long time. I want to tell you about a product I found called CodeFactory. You can find out more about the folks that are building CodeFactory at codefactory.software. Now, CodeFactory is a pattern automation tool that uses your source code like a data model. Okay. It runs inside of Visual Studio 2019, and it builds templates that will automate and attach to your code and allow you to do some pretty cool things with it. So think of this as refactoring on steroids, with the ability to add in dialogues and commands directly into Visual Studio with just a little bit of code that isn't the Visual Studio extension APIs. There are templates available. They're making templates available for refactoring, migrating, and scaffolding. There's an open source repository out there on GitHub that you can check out that has more about all of that stuff. But even more importantly is this last one. They've built a template to help migrate ASPX markup to .razor files for Blazor. This means you can use those Blazor Web Forms components and migrate an ASPX file directly. Let's do it. Let's migrate, and let's take a look at CodeFactory to migrate an ASPX file and get it in the right format quickly. And I'm seeing I've got just a few minutes left. The clock is on. Let's race through this and see just how quickly we can get through. I'm going to change branches here, and I've already got a bunch of my code already set up and formatted for CodeFactory over here. I've already got my CodeFactory template installed. By install, that means all you have to do is copy in a CodeFactory template to the base folder of your solution. All right. And crumbs, did I check in? I checked in the one that was already completed. Maddie, I checked in the one that was already completed. Should I do this again? I could do this again. I already have it sitting here completed. I want to show you what it looks like. You know what? I'm just going to rename this and rerun it, show you exactly how fast this runs. Where is it? Rename. And I'm going to call this default already done. See, when the demo is already done and folks can see, oh yeah, Jeff already finished the project. So here's the web forms, and I'm going to go grab, there it is, default ASPX, right click and check out down here at the bottom. This comes out of your CodeFactory template. This is something that Visual Studio didn't write. It's not part of CodeFactory. This is something that somebody extended and added, is migrate to Blazor. And I can now choose, well, where do you want to put this new file? Well, I'm going to put it into my eShop CodeFactory project. I'm going to say okay, and it's going to do the migration for me. I'll scroll up and I'll show you exactly what that looks like. Now, by default, it copies in some things thinking it's a sensible option here, like putting all of your code behind inside of a Razor CS file. For this, I've already got the code migrated. I don't need that, so I'm just going to delete this file. I've already got all the other logic to do the data fetch available for me. And if we take a quick look here, I don't need my page. I need to inject my iCatalog service, right? Because that wasn't something that we had in web forms. And I can start going down here and I can see there's my list view. And it's not a model, it's now an item type. And there was no submission being done here. I can get rid of that. I can just control space on these, and I'm moving along. I'm cooking with gas. Really really easy for me to interact with. I'm not going to put the items in here. I don't have enough time to walk through the entire update of this, but I do want to show you all of these are updated and real easy for you to interact with. I mean, this gets you somewhere quickly. Get route URL, that's not something we support, so we need to change the URLs for these hyperlinks. But it's done. It does work. I can show you the other file that's already over here that has everything already configured and ready to go. So I want you to take a look at Code Factory. I want you to check that out and see if it can help you get to completing and migrating your project faster. Blazor for ASP.NET Web Forms developers. There's a book that we have available for you, https://netmicrosoft.com/learn/ASP.NET/architecture. And you can find all the architecture books that we have available for you. I have a bit.ly for you that'll get you right to the Blazor Web Forms components. bit.ly/Blazor Web Forms components will take you right to the website, and you'll see shields on there that'll get you into the samples, the documentation, and more. All right. My name is Jeff Fritz. You can find me on the Twitter, the Twitch, the GitHub, the YouTube. I am C# Fritz pretty much everywhere. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode, this edition, this session of .NET Conf. How are we doing there, Maddie? Are there questions?
There are some questions. We're doing pretty good. You want to pull up the tweet board? I know you're doing, yeah, there you go. Both production and speaking right now.
I'm making things happen. All right, what do we got?
Let's start with this one from Jacob. So, can you use third-party Blazor components within web forms applications, same as those covered in the presentation?
All right, so it sounds like Jacob wants to go the other way. He wants to take his Blazor components and pull them back into web forms. We think there is an opportunity for this. We believe that there is a scenario where you could do this because Blazor renders as WebAssembly, and WebAssembly we know can be hosted on static websites, ASP.NET Core websites, any kind of web page could potentially host a Blazor application. So could you put them inside of a Blazor WebAssembly and host that on top of web forms? Yes. You're going to have to do a little bit of magic with passing state around so that you know everything about what that user is doing. Possible, but it's going to take a little bit of work and a little bit of mental juggling. I think there's a blog post or two that we can write about how that looks and what that interaction is, because it's not for the faint of heart.
Cool. You gonna have me back? All right, I'm back.
There we go.
Cool.
All right.
Very interesting. I think we have time for one more. So let's see. What about this one from
Come
Richard?
on, play Stump the Fritz. Here we go.
Have a mixed Blazor and Razor website? Is that possible? Can you add
Absolutely.
Blazor server applications into an existing site?
Well, so what folks are doing is not so much adding a existing Blazor server app into an existing site. They're adding a Blazor WebAssembly app into existing sites. So you end up with these. It's not a single page application. They have a name for this, where they have these vertical slices of functionality that are different spas, that are different single page application. So you might have the entire, right, if you're thinking about a storefront, right, you might have the entire shopping experience. That's one single page application. And you might have the entire back office experience. That's another single page application. And the systems administration for configuring and managing users and all that, that's another single page application. So you end up with these vertical slices of the website that folks turn into separate Blazor applications, and you end up passing a little bit of context around.
Very cool. All right. Well, thanks, Jeff. It's great to see you. I hope you take a break for a few hours until you inevitably come back on this stream somewhere, somehow.
Me on Twitch streaming somewhere? Surely you jest.
Never. Amazing.
Thank you so much, Maddie. It's great seeing you. Hope the rest of you enjoy the rest of your .NET Conf 2020. Take care.
Thanks, Jeff. All right.